Let's now take a look at the very important topic of form validation. Within any application or system, it is vital, very important that we sanitize the input from a user before we accept that data, especially before we save it and persist it in our database. Right? So in this example, I have already included a registration form. We have included a bit of CSS styling, which really only does one thing, right? So it is grabbing anything with a class of error, and it is setting the color equal to red, right? So you'll see some different elements here in our form that have a class of error. Here we have a span with that class, and we have several more spans throughout our form that have that error class. The next thing I'd like to point out is that we have now set the form action equal to HTML special chars, which is a function, and we are submitting this form to itself. And the reason for this is that it will send the submitted data from this form to this page itself instead of jumping to a different page. This way, the user will get the error messages on the same page as the form. And usually, JavaScript is used to do client-side validation. However, for the sake of this example, we are going to use PHP to do our client-side validation as well. Another thing to note is the HTML special characters function being used here. And what this function does is it converts special characters to HTML entities. This means that it will replace characters like our less than sign here. If this, for some reason, were to be entered into our form, it would convert that to something like this, right? So it would convert this to this. And this is mainly to prevent any XSS or cross-site scripting attacks via the URL, right? So the rest of the form is pretty straightforward, I believe. We have a name input field of type text. We have a span, and the sole purpose of these spans in our form is to show the error message, right? So you see all of them have the class of error, and if for some reason the user input does not match our validation rules, then this error message will be displayed to the user. It will simply echo the error or whatever customized message that we decide to send to the user, and it will also change that span color to red. Right, so we have a name input field, email, a website, a comment box, and we have some radio buttons for gender, and we have a submit button. So that's essentially it for our form. Now let's set up our validation rules. So let us do this right before our form. And let's open up our PHP tags. Close it off here. And the first thing we'll need to do, we'll need to define the variables and our error variables. So let's start with our error variables. Let us say name error, which already exists here in our span. And we're going to set basically each one of them to an empty string. So we can say email error, gender error, and website error. And let's set everything equal to an empty string. And let us now set variables for our fields. So I am going to create variables based on each name for our input fields. So name, email, then we have website, comment, and gender, and set these to an empty string. Now let us do a check, and we are checking to see if our server request method is equal to post. Right, so this means that our method here for our form is equal to post. So once we have checked that, let us start with our validation rules. First, let us check if the fields are empty. So we have a PHP built-in function called the empty function. And essentially, if a variable is empty, it displays an error message. Okay, so if it's not empty, it sends the user input data through. So let us check if it's empty. And we're going to do this for each one of our fields. So first we need our post, and our name value. And if it's empty, we want to set our name error and give a custom message and tell our user that name is required. Else, we simply set our name variable equal to post name. Right? And there is one additional function that I am going to add in here, and it is going to perform 3 different actions. It's going to trim our data, it's going to strip any slashes from our data, and remove any special characters. So, right before our closing if statement, I'm going to define a function called sanitizeData, and this is going to accept a parameter of data, and once we pass our data into this function, we first want to trim, right? So we're going to trim any string that is submitted in our data. After we do that, we are going to strip any slashes. Right, so it unquotes any quoted strings. And then finally, we're going to get rid of any special characters, or convert them rather. So we're going to perform this on our data as well. And then of course, we're going to return our data. All right, so this function is going to sanitize all of our data. So the first thing that needs to be done is to include this right before we set the post variable or the post data to our variable. So we can simply call our sanitize function here and pass in our variable. Right? So before this value gets set, it will essentially be trimmed, stripped of any slashes, and any HTML special characters will be converted. Okay, so we'll do this for each one of our field values. So next, let's do our email. So that was name. And let me ensure I'm spelling properly. So now let's check if and we need email next. We can say if it's empty, this is also a required field. Else, let's simply set email equal to the sanitized email. All right, so we're going to be doing this for pretty much each one of them. So I'm going to copy this. So to save some typing, and the next value is our website data. And I believe this one is optional. So we do not have to set any error message for that one, but we still have to sanitize it. So let me change this. All right, so there goes our validation for our website. Next is our comment section. And this is also optional, so we can leave our, and let me ensure that I am setting this to website error. All right, and setting this to website, and then setting this to comment error, and this to comment. And finally, we have our gender field, and it is a required field. And we change our variables and our post values to reflect that. Right, so comment, and we do not have a comment error variable, so we can just set this simply like that. Right, because these are not required, they're optional. All right, so now that we have done that, we need a way to display our data that has been submitted by our form. And to do this, I am going to stay within this registration form, and right before the closing body tag, let me do an echo statement that will echo the values of these fields. So let us first echo your information. Let's close our H2. And now we simply just want to echo each field. So first, let's echo our name. And let's put a break here. And I'll just copy this. So we need email, website, comment, and gender. All right, so we have our values to echo. So let us save our form and let us try it out. All right, so let's go back to our lessons directory, and now we have our forms validation form file. These are our fields, and if we try to submit, all right, so let's check and see what's going on with that. Our required fields show up here, so let me enter my information, site.com. All right, so we're not getting our validation here, so let us check our file and see what's going on. So we have our body, we have our form data, all right, let's check and see what's going on here. So first things first, our PHP tags are okay, they're closed off. Then we have our form, which closes properly. Then we have our echo statement here. All right, so let's look at our variables. Our request method is post. And our request method is post. Let me change this to all caps. So some of these are built-in strings inside our PHP language. So we have to check if it's equal to post. And I usually capitalize post and get. So let me capitalize them and save this. Let's try that now. So let's refresh. Okay, so now we get our validation showing up. Name is required, email is required. If we fill our form out and try to submit, call to function, sanitize data, something must be misspelled. All right, so it does not like our sanitize function. This has to be a scope issue. So this function begins here and ends here. Then we have our closing request method. Okay, so our function has to be outside of our request method. Okay. Right, so let's save this and let's go back. Let us refresh this, continue. Right, so let us now fill this form out again, submit, and of course it's still telling us gender is required, but now we get back our information here. Right, so if we fill out all our information, site.com, and let's say mail. All right, so now that we submit our information, we get all the data that we have submitted. Okay, so that in a nutshell is a basic, simple validation exercise using PHP. Now that we have our rules set up, we can add additional rules. For instance, we can add an additional rule to ensure that our email field is actually an email field. So right now, it does not check to ensure that our email field is valid, right? So if I was to remove the @ and click submit, it would still submit that email even though it's not a valid email address. So to address this issue, I can do an additional check here in my email rule. Okay, so before I set email equal, or not before, I can also check here. Let me do a check and say if not right. So now we're going to use include a value that needs to be filtered. Right, so it needs a value and it also has a filter default. So I need to plug in my email variable as the first value, and then the second value will be filter validate, and here we have email, and if this validation fails, we want to set the email error equal to, let's say, invalid email format. And this is a built-in validation function that PHP has. So let us now save this and test it. So if I have an email address and somehow didn't include the @ and click submit, it's going to tell me that it is an invalid email format. And ideally, you'd want to prevent that submission from happening. Let's also look at how to validate a text input. So let us do that with the name field. So we want to ensure that the name only contains letters or white spaces. So here we can say if and not, and we want to use the preg match, and this essentially matches a string to a pattern, and the pattern that we will be using is a regular expression. So the first parameter takes a regular expression, and then the second parameter takes our name variable, and if it does not match, meaning if it is not, I need name error here, if it does not match white spaces or letters, then we are going to tell the user only letters and white space allowed. And the regular expression, I am just going to copy and paste here. It is fairly simple to find regular expression pattern matching online. So this is what it would look like if we wanted to match against only letters and white spaces. Right, so let us save this and check it. So if I had some special characters, for instance, and click submit, it would let me know that only letters and white spaces are allowed, right? So no special characters. It's going to give me that validation. All right. So the final piece to this form is to prevent the form from emptying out the input fields when the user submits the form. So we need to add a few more things to our form. So let's do that now. Right, so I've modified the form, and let me show you what I've done. So we've already added additional validation rules for name and email. I've gone ahead and added another validation rule for website. And what I've done is added a match here, a regular expression, to ensure that the website is a properly formed URL, right? So it should have www. and .com. In my form, I've simply added some echo statements to a value attribute for each field, for our name, email, website, and our comments here inside our text area, and also our radio buttons. So essentially we are keeping the values, or we're still going to show the value in the form even after the user submits. All right, so that's it. And we have saved our form, and let us refresh our form. So now let us try to enter a site without a .com. Now let us enter test comment, submit. All right, so if we submit, all right, so our URL matching is not working, but everything else is working. So if we try to submit this information, it gives us some validation. And let us do a quick check and see why that might not be working. All right, so essentially we're checking our input, sanitizing it, ensuring that we have the correct data. All right, so just checking our other validation rules to ensure they're okay. Website, and we're matching based on our regular expression. So this is the regular expression, and our second parameter would be our website, and then we are setting our invalid URL error. So let me try this one last time, and if it doesn't work, we will just have to figure that one out at a later time. Okay, so here we get our validation working. It is now telling us that we have an invalid URL. All right, so all our validation rules are now working, and I believe we'll call it there for this video. I've gone way over, way longer than I had wanted to. So in a nutshell, we have different rules, validation rules for different types of fields, data fields in our form.